Ready, Jill? Back on the record, 21 CR 5052, State of Ohio versus Michael Jason Meade. Do we need to put anything on the record prior to bringing in the jury?
Not from the state, Your Honor. Not on behalf of Mr. Meade, Your Honor, no.
Okay, let's go get the jury. Do you want to get the witness already up here, or? Oh, we're not putting the live stream on yet. Get a second there. Isn't that fun? Such a great job.
All right.
Everyone could have a seat. Have a good evening last night? Good, good, good. Sergeant, you're still under oath. Any further direct examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, we need to. Think you can walk. We have a new bailiff. Courtney had a stomach flu or whatever, so. So Faith is Judge Munson's bailiff, and she's gonna be with us today. Go, good? All right. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, Sergeant.
Morning, sir.
Sergeant, I want to circle back to some of what we were talking about yesterday. When you collected the weapon, you did a count for the ammunition and that, along with the spent shell casings, you came up with 29, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that was one short of the capacity.
Yes, sir.
Were you able to reconcile that, why it was one short?
I believe so. I remember there were conversations concerning, Deputy Meade indicated that he may have had 29 total rounds in the weapon itself, the firearm, in the magazine and one in the chamber then.
Okay. But by the way, the individual that you took the weapon from and that you took the photographs of, is he in the courtroom today?
We would stipulate to identity, Your Honor.
So stipulated.
All right. Now, in the course of the activities you did in connection with this investigation, did you take photographs of clothing?
I did.
Okay. And where were those photographs taken?
At our lab at CSSU.
Okay. So at your office.
Correct.
And when I use the term pose, does that have a meaning when we're talking about photographs?
It does.
All right, would you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that means?
Pose means it's not in its original position, that we have or somebody has moved it at some point.
Yeah, approach the
You may.
witness. Sergeant, and another stack of photographs. This is State's Exhibit 5J through State's Exhibit 5DD. Would you look through those photographs and tell me if you recognize, first of all, do you recognize the photographs?
I do.
And what are those photographs of?
These are photographs that I took of property that was retrieved from the Franklin County Coroner's Office out of this incident.
What, do you know where it was retrieved from, or are you just assuming it came from the coroner's office?
Well, one of my folks, Detective Nicole Prysock, picked this property up from the Franklin County Coroner's Office, I believe on December 7th, 2020. And I retrieved a box containing these items on December 17th after I was notified by Detective Art Hughes, the lead detective, to photograph these items. So I went down to the property room, retrieved this box, opened the box, took photographs of these items, and put them back in the box, put them back in the property room after I was finished.
So you retrieved them from the property.
Correct.
Are you sure that they came from the morgue, or could they have come from Riverside Hospital?
That, I'm not sure, to be honest. It's so much property, but I know I picked this up after Art Hughes told me to pick up he gave me numbers identifying what to collect from the property room.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't even show those. Okay. Oh, let me have those photographs. May I publish these, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. This is State's Exhibit 5J. And tell me what that is a photograph of.
Detective Hughes had asked me to take photos of any holes or tears in the fabric of the clothing that was in this property. So this is a photo of a hoodie that I retrieved from this property that then I mark. You'll see certain yellow arrows where I've marked tears or holes in the clothing.
Such as right there.
That's correct.
And when we talk about posed, this is a posed photo, is that correct?
That's correct. That's butcher paper that we use. It's clean. And then I got an identifier of which identifies, it's our case number, which identifies the date and time that I was performing these actions.
And this yellow arrow identifies a tear, but the garment is cut, is that correct?
That's correct. I pieced those together so it would be understood that it's a hoodie. If you would lay them out flat, you wouldn't know what it was. So I put those together to show that at one point this was a complete hoodie without the tears.
Okay. And you've done a number of homicide cases, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is it uncommon for clothing to have been cut off the decedent?
It happens frequently, but that's how the squad is able to, or the hospital is able to try and treat folks.
State's Exhibit 5K.
You'll see various,
that?
yeah, I believe that's, it may be a close-up of the one we just saw, but as we go through these, you'll see a succession of arrows pointing out
Yeah.
various holes or tears or,
So that's a close-up of a hole in the hoodie.
correct.
State's Exhibit 5L.
Same thing, same answer, just pointing out with scale, a hole
Okay.
or tear.
State's Exhibit 5M.
This is the back of the hoodie, just flipped over, the same type of activity going on there. And I did place clean white printer paper in between to show a contrast, so one could actually see the
See the
holes and tears, correct.
Okay. Then State's Exhibit 5N.
I believe we're seeing the close-ups of what we just saw an overall of in the previous photo.
State's Exhibit 5O.
And pair of boxers with arrows pointing out similar discrepancies in the normal fabric.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5P.
We have this labeled as just a T-shirt, and the same type of activity where I put paper in between the fabric. It was also torn in different spots or cut, and I was able to piece this back together to give some kind of a look of the T-shirt.
And that's the front of the T-shirt.
That is the front of the T-shirt, yes, sir.
State's Exhibit 5R.
And I believe this would be the back of the same T-shirt, same type of activity with the arrows and holes and tears.
State's Exhibit. I'm sorry, that was 5Q. Can't read my own writing. State's Exhibit 5R.
Close-ups of that one grouping from the overall.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5S.
It's another close-up with scale.
State's Exhibit 5T.
I believe that's the lower right of the rear of the T-shirt with scale, just a close-up.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5U.
And I believe these were shorts and just posed again.
Okay. That's the front of the shorts.
Correct, I believe so.
State's Exhibit 5B.
And I believe these would be the back of the shorts with arrows pointing out anomalies or holes or tears.
State's Exhibit 5W.
Close-up with scale.
State's Exhibit 5X.
That's the rear of the shorts there at the top of the waistband with just the arrows and scale.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5Y.
Front of a pair of jeans, and I pieced those together to, obviously they're cut. They were cut on both legs, and pieced those together to show a front view.
State's Exhibit 5Z.
Similar thing, back view.
Okay. And it has the arrows there, is that correct?
That's correct. I believe it just for an overall, trying to get the whole pair of jeans in. There may
Turn
be,
off your phones.
Sorry, Your Honor, it was me. Violation. I apologize to everyone.
You want me to give it to you? State's Exhibit 5AA.
that is a close-up of those arrows you pointed out with scale.
Okay. And then we have State's Exhibit 5BB.
In that part of that package that I retrieved, this was a holster that was in it.
And that's the clip side of the holster.
Correct, sir.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5CC.
Opposite side of the same holster.
Okay. And finally, State's Exhibit DD.
This is an overall view of the rest of the property. I believe that's a wallet as well. Yes, that came from,
And these are the contents of the wallet that you've laid out, is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Sergeant. I believe that's all the questions I have at this time.
Any cross-examination?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good morning, Sergeant.
Morning, sir.
We know each other. I'm Mark Collins. I represent one of the attorneys for Jason Meade in this action. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate your work. I just have a couple quick questions for you and concepts. I'm going to use a couple pictures. I have their markings for the prosecution. It's the same picture that were provided to us. That's okay. There's too many. Thank you, though. Sergeant, what type of other responsibilities have you had in your law enforcement career?
A lot, actually. Been on 30 years, and I've been patrol, internal affairs, community liaison. Was promoted in 2012 and back to patrol for a while, and internal affairs and over to crime scene.
And when you're on crime scene and you're called to the scene, there's normally a lead detective, correct?
Correct.
Right. And in any time there's involved in an officer, there's other people there, correct? Part of the CERT team.
Correct.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the CERT team is.
It doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be where there was a select group that would process officer-involved cases, more senior detectives and supervisors.
Mainly from the homicide division.
That's correct, mainly from homicide.
And back in December of 2020, that was in place.
It was.
Okay. And their job was to gather as much information as possible and provide it to the prosecution.
Yes, sir.
They also would provide it to the Division of Police, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when you got to the scene on December the 4th, 2020, a few hours later, correct?
Correct.
And your team, right?
Correct.
You're being guided by Detective Mounts.
Correct.
And Detective Mounts was part of the CERT team?
Correct.
And he was a scene leader, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Detective Hughes is part of the CERT team, correct?
Correct.
Detective Croom, who was there that day, correct?
Correct.
Detective Shepard.
Yes, sir.
All those people are experienced homicide detectives on CERT team members, and they were all at the scene that day, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're following their lead, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in general, and I'm going to, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Right.
This had been marked previously by the government as 2HH. You take a look at that.
Yes,
May I publish this, Your Honor?
Right.
So using this kind of in generality, Sergeant, those cones on 2HH, that's everywhere. You don't need the lights down. Don't worry. Thank you, though. Those cones are placed by people on your team, correct?
Correct.
And no one on the team knows how those got there, right?
Correct.
You can only photograph them as you observed them.
That's right.
And so when the government put the picture of the door up there, that's just a picture of the door as they observed it 2 or 3 or 4 hours later.
That's right.
Can't say if the door was open at the time, can't say how far the door was open at the time of the incident, can only take a picture of how it was when you took that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now specifically on 2HH, these are all shell casings to right below the fence, correct?
Correct.
All right, and there was 6 of them, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So on there, tell the ladies and the jury how shell casings normally are ejected from a firearm.
For right-handed individuals, they would usually eject out of the chamber to the right, up and to the right.
And that's a handgun, correct?
Correct.
And how about a rifle, sir?
I'm not an expert on rifles, but it pretty much acts the same type of concept, but I'm not sure about distance and height that they would reach. It all depends. There's variables involved, the height of the firearm when it was fired, whether someone was standing or kneeling, that type of thing.
All can affect it, right?
Yes, sir.
And anything prior to you guys getting there could have affected where these ended up, correct?
That's where they were when we took photos, but that's a fair statement.
Prior to that, one of the objects of the first responders is to try to secure the scene and isolate it so there's no scene contamination, correct?
Yes, sir.
But things happen and things are moved during that process, right?
It could be.
Wind can cause it, people stepping on it, kicking it by accident. Many things can happen. That's why you want as few people in the scene as possible, correct?
That's the goal.
Now, you brought out the rifle before with the prosecutor. On a rifle, did that have a deflector on it?
Oh, man. I did not. I don't know, sitting here.
If I told you it did, you would have no reason to disagree with me, correct?
I would have no reason sitting here disagreeing.
And what does a deflector do on a rifle, sir?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. That rifle you indicated could be fully automatic, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when something's fully automatic, let me back up. When you have a handgun and you pull the trigger, how many projectiles comes out?
1.
If it's semi-automatic, how many come out?
1.
If you have a rifle that's fully automatic and you pull the trigger once, how many projectiles come out?
As long as you hold the trigger in, as many projectiles is going to come out.
If the quickest you can, or something like that, right? It varies.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And part of your job, the crime scene search unit, is when you found that you were given the gun or the rifle.
Correct.
You compared to how many were left in the magazine, correct?
Correct.
And you compared it that there was 6 shell casings, correct?
Yes.
So your job is to say, hey, are we missing any more shell casings? So you know the capacity of that magazine is 30, correct?
Yes.
So there was a discrepancy of 1, correct?
Yes.
However, that you asked my client, hey, how many did you start with, correct?
I don't remember the exact conversation, but it would have taken place, yes.
Right. And he told you 29, correct?
There was I can't remember exactly what he told me, to be honest. I just can't remember, but
You just told the prosecutor that discrepancy was cleared up by my client.
he indicated there was 29. I just can't remember exactly what he said.
And how many were left in the magazine? 23, correct?
Correct.
So he didn't say 30, he didn't say 28, 26, 25, he didn't say 23 in it, correct?
Correct.
He could have no possible way of knowing how many came out when he pulled, correct? That's impossible.
I don't know that, to be honest. If it was set on fully automatic, yes, sir, that's correct. He
He would
wouldn't.
have no way of knowing. So the 23 that were left in the chamber, plus the 6 projectiles in the government's 2HH, meet 29, correct?
Correct.
And that's exactly what my client told the detectives that evening, correct?
That's correct.
So he told the truth. And that's corroborated, and that's,
Overruled.
so he was truthful about how many he started with.
Correct. The numbers matched.
If he wanted to lie, he could have said, yeah, there's 24, then nothing would make sense, right?
That is correct.
Now, may I approach a witness, Your Honor?
Okay.
These were previously marked as Government's Exhibit 2XXY. And I'm 2XXY. And this is the Defendant's Exhibit I, if you take a look at that. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
May I publish, Your Honor?
Okay.
Sergeant, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what plaintiff's or prosecution's 2XXY is.
That is a scene sketch.
Okay. And Mr. Merkel placed that up there, correct?
He did.
All right. And on there, there's an evidence legend, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you list 14 things as well as 2 cars.
They're on there. I didn't particularly list. Gary Cooper did that, and Sonny Williams did the evidence, but that's what it shows.
And that is drawn based on the evidence collection, correct? Defendant's eye.
Correct.
So those 14 numbers there, when the jurors have it back in there, those 14 numbers match the 14 numbers plus the 2 cars on this.
Yes, sir.
And that's how you keep track of where things were collected and where they were found.
That's correct.
And there'll be a key of all that, correct, for the evidence that was turned in.
Correct.
And when you guys turn in evidence, you don't, or photograph evidence, you have no idea if it's relevant or not, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You take as many pictures of the whole scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
So in this situation, there were pictures taken of each bedroom, right?
I believe so.
The downstairs bedroom, correct?
I believe so.
Outside around the house, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the prosecutor's photographs they showed you so far, there's a lot more than that of the totality of the situation, correct?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned on direct with the prosecutor that the gun that was found in the kitchen, the extended mag clip,
Yes, sir.
and you recognize that as an extended magazine clip?
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that is?
It's pretty much self-explanatory, but it extends out from the weapon. It doesn't tighten flush with the weapon. It holds more ammunition in it.
And with regards to that, you indicated that there were DNA swabs done of the trigger, correct?
I believe so.
The grip
Correct.
and the frame, correct?
I believe so.
And on those pictures, you can see blood on the gun, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then with regards, the prosecutor just showed you pictures of the holster, okay? May I publish, Your Honor?
What?
The prosecutor showed you pictures of the holster, correct?
Yes.
May I publish, Your Honor? Yes. So first on 2BB, that's one view of the holster, correct?
Yes.
And there's no blood on there or anything, correct?
Not that I know of.
If there was, you would have noted it, correct?
I didn't test for blood, but visually, I didn't see any.
Correct, but visually, when you guys go through the clothing, if there's a hole, you mark it, right?
That's correct.
And so visually, if you saw blood on here, you would have denoted that in the notes, correct?
Hopefully I would have, but I was just, I was assigned to take pictures of the clothing and what was in the property. So I wasn't doing a visual. I mean, there was blood on most everything that I took out, but I don't remember blood on particularly on the holster.
You don't
no.
see anything there, correct?
I don't.
And on 2CL, nothing on there, correct?
Correct.
And do you know if that was tested for blood or DNA?
I don't know that.
Now, you had different divisions with regards to your team, right, of duties?
That is correct.
You had your specifics. Say the name of that machine.
Leica, the scanner. Yes, sir.
And 3D, and how high was that fence? Do you remember?
It's about around exactly 6 feet. I mean, give or take a few inches.
And then in front, where the pictures are, there's a step up to the porch, correct?
Correct.
And then there's another step up into that side door, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in terms of your responsibility, someone else, Detective Gibson's probably taking all the pictures, right?
That's true, yes.
And the other detectives are dividing up, collecting the evidence.
Yes,
And then as a team, you give that all to either Detective Mounts and then Detective Hughes, correct?
the property we would turn into the property room.
But you're guided at the scene by Detective Mounts.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at that scene, Detective Mounts was there involved in, helping point things out and stuff, correct?
Yes,
And no one on your team had anything to do with the car that was parked on the street, correct?
correct.
So there were pictures taken, but you guys had nothing to do with that, correct?
That wasn't our responsibility, no,
That
sir.
was the responsibility of Detective Mounts, correct?
I believe at that scene, that would be his
That
responsibility.
was his responsibility. So if he were to testify that, he was the person who dealt with the car.
I believe so.
And when I mean deal with the car, I mean the car eventually is taken to the barn, correct?
That's correct.
That's normal procedure.
That's normal
And then
procedure.
it's photographed at the barn, correct?
Yes,
Tow truck has to come and get the car, right?
yes,
So that's all Detective Mounts.
yes,
Okay. And you never saw Detective Talaferro there, correct?
no,
At the scene. She was not involved at the scene on December the 4th.
no, she was not working that day.
She had nothing to do with gathering evidence or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Okay.
Sergeant, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here, sir.
Any redirect?
Just briefly, Your Honor. Sergeant, Mr. Collins just asked you about preserving the scene and keeping it from being contaminated. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And primarily, what that means is they keep outsiders out. Police officers are often inside of the perimeter and inside of the scene. Is that correct?
The way I would describe, most of the time, we try to keep most everybody out, police officers including, once we get there. Before then, there's obviously
Right.
a lot of other concerns, but after we get there, we want to limit as much as possible.
Once you guys begin your documentation of the scene and processing of it, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you can't account for who may have gone through the scene, gone through the side yard prior to your arrival,
I cannot.
including the defendant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So when Mr. Publishes, this is State's Exhibit 2HH. All these shell casings and so forth. You can't state that the defendant wouldn't have had the opportunity to observe those shell casings prior to your arrival at the scene.
Your Honor. As to what my client.
Hold on, hold on. 'Cause I have real time. Overruled.
Could you, I've got lost in the,
I may have lost the question at this point.
I can read it. All these shell casings and so forth, you can't state that the defendant wouldn't have had the opportunity to observe those shell casings prior to your arrival.
that's correct. I would not.
So when Mr. Collins says that in reconciling the count, the ammunition count, that Mr. Meade would have had no knowledge of how many shots were fired, you can't say that. Is that correct?
If I'm understanding your question right, if the Weapon was set to automatic at the time of this incident. I would not know how many rounds came out at the time of one trigger pull.
Correct, but if Mr. Meade had observed the shell casings, he'd know that there were 6 shell casings there.
I don't know what Mr. Meade observed.
I understand that. That's my point, is,
Your Honor, I'll object on leading at this point.
Councilman, approach real quick. You may continue. Oh, sorry. You guys are becoming pros.
I guess to reiterate, Sergeant, you don't know what Mr. Meade may have seen or not seen before you got to the scene, is that correct?
That's correct.
You also did some DNA swabbing or some swabbing to collect possible DNA. Well, you personally didn't, but your team did.
That's correct.
Just because swabs are taken doesn't mean that you necessarily find DNA or that there's sufficient DNA for comparison. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Very briefly.
Okay.
Sergeant, when you're taking pictures of shell casings, someone else has already searched out to look for those, correct?
Most of the time, yes.
And they could be hidden in the grass, correct?
Correct.
They could be hidden from the naked eye, correct?
Correct.
And people actually get down sometimes to look and see. There's, shell casings are very small, correct?
Very small, yes, sir.
It's fair to say that in all your years of crime scene search and all the other divisions that you've had, people miss sometimes the amount of shell casings that are seen, correct?
Unfortunately, yes.
Thank you, sir.
All right, you sit down. Are those your gloves that you brought, or?
They were over here. Okay.
Call your next witness.
Honor. The state will call Ms. Celia next.
You come on up here. It's a little maze throughout this courtroom. I should put yellow tape down so give everyone a. Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear, affirm under penalty of perjury, your testimony in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Pull yourself up close to the microphone. And you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Get all my exhibits here. All right, Ms. Celia, I want to start by having you say and spell your name for us.
My name is Amy Culia. First name is Aimee. Last name is Qulia.
Where do you work?
I work at the FBI in the Firearms and Toolmarks Unit.
What's your position there?
I am a physical scientist forensic examiner in the Firearms and Toolmarks Unit.
Would you please tell us about the educational background that you have that allows you to be in that position?
I have an undergraduate degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I have a master's degree in forensic science from the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida.
When did you obtain your degrees?
The undergraduate was in 2002, and I think 2013 was my graduate degree.
How long have you worked at the FBI laboratory?
Approximately 19 years.
And how long have you been in the Firearms and Toolmarks Unit?
About 9 of those years.
What did you do at the FBI laboratory before moving over to Firearms and Toolmarks?
I worked in the latent print unit, that's fingerprints and palm prints, in the FBI laboratory as well.
And why did you move units at the lab?
I was just looking for diversity of work, more excitement, and possible deployments.
You actually have an interest in firearms?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I grew up with firearms. My father is, or was, excuse me, a firearms instructor for the FBI, so I've been shooting and handling firearms most of my life.
Did you obtain any specialized training to become a qualified Firearms and Toolmarks examiner?
Yes, I did. I followed the training program set out by the FBI, and that's a quality document that documents each aspect of my training. From start to finish, it took about 2.5 years to complete this training.
Could you please explain to the jurors in a little more detail about what's involved in this training to become a qualified Firearms and Toolmarks examiner?
Yes. Basically everything having to do with firearms, so how they're designed, how they're made, the history of firearms development and ammunition. Most of my job is at a microscope comparing bullets and cartridge cases to individual firearms to see if a particular firearm fired a particular bullet or cartridge case. Another part of my job is going to crime scenes, conducting shooting incident reconstructions. I did this work as a mentee. I had a mentor, and it's like an apprentice program. I did a series of comparison. I'm also qualified in tool marks, so I learned about the manufacturing of tools. And basically, it's a kind of a mentee-mentor relationship. So going to different crime scenes, taking case notes for examiners, writing reports, and then the culmination of this is passing a proficiency or qualification exam. So I had to take qualification exams in firearms, tool marks, and shooting incident reconstructions to become qualified to do this work on my own.
So if I understand your testimony correctly, this mentor-mentee relationship you're describing where you learn how to become, and in particular I'm talking about the shooting incident reconstructions, that involves you going and working these cases with your mentor, correct?
Yes, my mentor as well as other qualified examiners.
So what is entailed in a shooting incident reconstruction as you're learning this process and how to do it yourself?
Are you talking about could you be more clear? I'm sorry.
When you're learning how to perform shooting incident reconstructions with your mentor, can you tell us about that process and what you're doing and what the ultimate goal is and being qualified to do those on your own?
Got it. When we deploy to a crime scene, we are looking for bullet holes, impacts, and we are establishing trajectories. We are looking to document everything in place as we find it. We do this using case notes and photographs and 3D scanners and 3D imaging technology. We also, as part of my mentee-mentor relationship, I would practice writing reports and practice testifying as to the results of those reports. Is that what you
And
mean?
what do those reports yield? What kind of findings are the shooting incident reconstructionists able to obtain using this process that you've described?
We establish unique identifiers for anything that we find on scene. So each hole or impact is given a number. We describe the quality of those findings. So we will say their location, how they look, their directionality. A trajectory connects two or more points within space. So sometimes we can do this using a single hole if it can sustain weight. We'll be able to put a long rod through it and then measure 2 points or more on that rod to establish how it's moving through 3 dimensions. So the X, the Y, and the Z axis on 2 points on a single plane will show you how it's moving through space in relationship to other items.
So, and that's based on the damage, for example, to like a solid object that's been struck by a projectile, and you look at that and are able to get the trajectory from it?
That's correct.
And you had described in your testimony holes and impacts. And could you please explain to the jurors what those are and what the difference is?
A hole is basically any time a projectile penetrates an item. So it goes in and it comes out of an item. An impact is where it will impact the item but not penetrate through it. It might deflect or skip off of it.
Thank you for explaining that. So as part of your training to become a shooting incident reconstructionist, did you have to pass tests? I think you mentioned that earlier, but can you tell us about the final process to become fully qualified to do a shooting incident reconstruction?
Yes. So a large part of my training was, again, going on deployments with qualified examiners and observing how they are documenting the scene and how they are writing their reports. So I did that in a learning capacity for about 2.5 years. Then I passed a proficiency test, or excuse me, a qualification test. The one that was given to me was a car shot from known angles. I had to document it in the way that is expected, write a report, and I passed that qualification exam. After being qualified, I also had observed exercises. So it's a real scene, and a qualified examiner came to my first, I believe, 2 scenes to just make sure that I was doing everything as expected.
And having gone through that process, what results did you obtain through your qualification to become a shooting incident reconstructionist?
I passed all of those exams.
Thank you. How many shooting incident reconstruction deployments have you been involved with in your career?
Many. I would estimate between 20 and 40 total. That's in a learning capacity, and that's as a qualified examiner, whether I'm the lead examiner, meaning that my name will appear on the report, or I am assisting other examiners. So I still go out to crime scenes even if I'm not the lead examiner and won't be published on the report, to serve as kind of a technician for them.
And have you testified as a firearms expert before on a shooting incident reconstruction case?
Not specifically a shooting incident reconstruction case. Most of my testimony is in the firearms realm.
Thank you. Do you belong to any discipline-specific groups?
I do. I am a member of AFTE. That's the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners. That is our discipline-specific organization.
Thank you. And so when you are called to deploy to a shooting scene, can you just walk us through the process of what that happens since your qualification to do these sort of examinations?
Sure. When I'm called to deploy to a scene, I deploy as part of a team generally. And that team is called the LSRT. That stands for the Laboratory Shooting Reconstruction Team. I'm not the only person from the laboratory that deploys. I represent the Firearms and Toolmarks unit, but we also deploy with 3 other units that help me basically run through the scene. There is an ERTU person, that's the Evidence Response Team unit. That person serves as a go-between between the local entity that is collecting evidence and my team, the LSRT. We also deploy with the Technical Hazards unit, so they will help me if there's a bullet hole really high up, they'll get ladders so I can inspect it. If I have to cut into a wall, they'll actually do the cutting. They just handle the mechanics of the scene. And then I also deploy with a member of the Operational Projects Unit. I'll refer to them as OPU. They supply photographers and those 3D scanners and total stations to document the scene in 3 dimensions.
And how do you and your team then, with all this personnel, examine a scene? What's that process look like?
Before we deploy, we have a pre-deployment meeting. So we will get some information regarding what we should expect at the scene. So if there's any technical hazards, what the environment is like, if we're going under the compulsion of like a warrant. So we will deploy knowing usually a rough number of how many shots were taken, what type of firearm was used, and all of that helps me prepare my deployment kit so I know which supplies to bring, what to expect generally when I show up.
And when you show up at the scene, do you collect evidence?
No, I am completely separate from the evidence side of the house.
But is there an analysis of holes or impacts at the scene that's conducted by you?
Yes, yes.
And you also analyze the scene to calculate trajectories, correct?
To establish the trajectories and to make sure that they're documented appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Are there any limitations in the examinations that you conduct when you're performing a shooting incident reconstruction?
Yes. If there are missing items, that's generally something I can't say anything about. So if, for example, glass was shot and it has crumpled, I can't say anything about if something went through that glass. If there is missing evidence, so if the crime scene has been disturbed and things are missing from the scene, I can't really put them back or come to any conclusions regarding missing evidence. If a projectile or a bullet hits an intervening object, it can cause deflection, and that means it can fragment and go in 2 different directions. Also, if, say, 3 shots were taken, there might be more or less than 3 holes. So if there aren't any intervening objects, if they all go into a decedent or something that is no longer in the scene, might not have any trajectories to establish. Conversely, it could also hit an item and fragment, and I might have 2 or more holes from a single projectile.
Thank you. So turning our attention to this case, I want to ask you about a shooting incident reconstruction done here back in December of 2020. So let me ask you, on December 17th, 2020, were you deployed to 3996 Estate Place here in Columbus, Franklin County, Ohio?
Yes, I was.
And that was for a shooting incident reconstruction, correct?
That's correct.
And to help you explain to the jurors what happened with your analysis and everything, we're going to show you some exhibits. So let me get those. May I approach, Your Honor?
Good.
So, Ms. Keelia, I'm going to start by handing you exhibits that have been marked for identification purposes as 10A through 10F. Would you please review those items and let me know when you're finished? So those are 6 photographs, correct?
That's correct.
Do you recognize the scenes depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
Are they scenes from 3996 Estates Place back on December 17th, 2020?
Yes.
Do all 6 of those photographs fairly and accurately depict the scene as you saw it on that day at your analysis?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I publish?
Yes.
Thank you, May. I'm going to take those and put them up on our screen. Thank you. I'm going to start with Exhibit 10A. That's right. Okay. There we go. All right, I'm going to focus in here on the middle. Lost my autofocus. And actually, while we're talking about this particular exhibit, there's another one I want to show you, which is number 26. All right. Are you familiar with this item, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
That is a storm door.
Is that the same storm door from Exhibit 10A?
Yes, it is.
And prior to court, when you came into town to testify for trial, did you have an opportunity to examine Exhibit 26? Look at it?
Yes, I did.
And is this, this is the door from 3996 Estates Place from December 2020, correct?
That is correct.
And having a chance to review this item, is it in substantially similar condition as it was when you came and did your shooting incident reconstruction back in 2020?
It is.
Thank you. So going back to Exhibit 10A, door looks a little bit different there. Tell us about the items that are in the screen part of that door.
I established unique identifiers. That means that I've numbered each hole and impact. I means impact, so impact number 1, hole number 2, hole number 3, and you can't really see it, but hole number 4 is down at the bottom. I also have my trajectory rods that I spoke of earlier, and those are inserted into the holes. They're stabilized by trajectory cones to keep them in place, and then they were secured into place with some duct tape on the backside.
And that's all consistent, and that's the process that's followed, correct?
That's correct.
And when you, and those are holes. You had described earlier identifying holes created by projectiles. So you identified those items there as holes 1 through 3?
Impact 1 and holes 2 through 4.
Okay, thank you. And so how were you able to establish those trajectories to line up those rods and establish the direction that the projectiles were going?
I established the directionality and the trajectory by looking at what remained at the scene. So the back of the door has metal that is part of that grate that is curled in a certain way that indicates the directionality of the projectile as it passed through. So it didn't just blow out, it's actually kind of curled back, which if you're used to looking at scenes and how typical materials interact with projectiles, this is something that I've learned to do and interpret.
Thank you. Let's have a look now at Exhibit 10B. Can you tell us what we see here?
Those are close-ups of my tags. So we have the indicators surrounding each hole to establish which hole we're looking at. We have the trajectories that were established, trajectory 1, 2, and 3. Those were marked with little blue tags, not only for my documentation, but also so they're picked up by the scanner.
Thank you. And I will show you briefly 10C, which, is this another view of those same trajectory rods and the screen door at the home?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Okay, now moving on to 10D. Could you please tell us what is depicted in State's Exhibit 10D?
That is a photograph of impact 5, hole 6, and hole 7.
Okay. And where is this in the residence?
This is in the kitchen area above the sink, so kind of close to the ceiling, above like a soffit area.
Thank you. And this is State's Exhibit 10E. Please tell us about this. Is this a close-up of hole 7?
Yes, it is. This is the trim above that area, so it's actually oriented sideways. So if you flip it, that's, yeah, correct. There you go. That's it in its correct position.
Thank you. Finally, State's Exhibit 10F. Please verify whether this is oriented correctly.
No, we gotta flip it again.
Like this.
There we are, yes.
Thank you.
And that's a hole going through part of a picture and into the wall.
You mentioned a few times during your testimony that a 3D scanner is used in shooting incident reconstructions. And I believe you mentioned that one was used for this particular shooting incident reconstructions. Can you tell us a little bit about that for this case?
Just generally, so that is somewhat outside of my scope. I just make sure that those graphics are in alignment with what I am documenting in my notes and that everything was done appropriately. On a very basic level, it just takes measurements from objects within the scene and relates them to each other to form a 3D product.
And of course, this is a tool that you were trained on to use and that process to become qualified to do shooting incident reconstructions, correct?
Well, to be clear, I don't run the scanner. I just have the very basic knowledge of how it works, so I can make sure that my graphics accurately are representative of the scene.
To interpret the results, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. And did you write a report to reflect your findings on the examination of the Estates Place residence?
Yes, I did.
And based on your analysis of the scene, what conclusions did you reach and document in your report?
I documented 7 bullet holes or impacts. I established 3 trajectories going through a storm door, going from the southwest to the northeast. So that's from like the yard into the kitchen. I also established those 3 of the 7 impacts and holes were in the kitchen. I did not associate those with any of the trajectories that go through the door.
And can you explain to us whether that's significant that the impacts and holes in the kitchen didn't line up with the trajectories that you established in the door? What does that mean?
That means that there's not a direct correlation. So it wasn't a straight shot through the door directly into like the wall above the sink, basically.
And you were describing how bullets can deflect or break apart. And can you explain how those marks could be consistent with the trajectories established at the screen door?
They could be, but that is not necessarily the case. It is not unexpected for an intervening object to be hit and for something to fragment and go off its original course and end up in another area, for example. But I'm very clear in my report that I don't know.
And that's one of the limitations that you've discussed, correct?
That's correct.
Now, has your experience allowed you to tell us about how different materials interact with projectiles?
Yes.
And that's based on the hardness of the material, correct? maybe the composition
Its
of it?
composition would be more accurate, yes.
And can you please tell us a little bit about how, say, like a metal material interacts with a bullet versus a softer, more viscous material like the human body?
In general, so when I'm test firing, I usually test fire into a water tank, and that tends to slow bullets down very much. It's a very viscous fluid. It's just water. So I can take like a high-powered rifle and shoot it into water, and it stops the rounds from moving. So it's engaging with them, and it slows it down. If you have something easier to penetrate, and you're not engaging with tissue or any viscous fluid, bullets will tend to zip. So they'll go through a couple intervening objects without changing trajectory very much. That's a very general overview, although that it is consistent. With looking at materials like metal, sometimes we'll look for crowning. A high velocity round will hit something, and it's kind of like that image of a drop of milk going into a pool of milk where it creates kind of a crown. That will happen with a high velocity round going through metal. That's something that we typically see. We look at how it interacts with glass, so I can tell the number of shots and which one was taken first if I have like a laminate glass that is still there based on the fracture pattern. So all of this kind of culminates into my assessment of the scene and how I would expect bullets to engage with the substrates around me at the scene.
Can we
And can
take
you
a,
just tell
can we
us-
take a quick break, real quick? You want to approach? Break in the middle of your testimony. We're going to take our morning break now. Do not discuss this case among yourselves. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form an expressive opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. About 15 minutes.